When I was a girl, my father taught me something about gardens that I have never forgotten. He said, "Margaret, the most dangerous thing in any garden is not the frost, and it is not the drought. It is the weed that grows slowly enough that you don't notice it until it has taken the root space of everything you planted." I have thought about those words every single day since the morning I stood in my summer house and watched Elena Vasquez walk out of it wearing my pearls. Because that is what had been done to Arthur and to me. Not a sudden, violent robbery. Not the kind of theft you can point to and name on the day it happens. Something slower. Something that had been growing underground for years, quietly, patiently in the dark, while I was busy tending everything above the surface. By the time I saw it, it had already taken the roots. But here is the thing my father never said, because perhaps he didn't know it yet. Or perhaps he thought I would work it out for myself. A garden designer always knows what was planted. She has the original plans. She knows what belongs there and what doesn't. And she knows better than anyone how to clear ground. This is the story of how I cleared mine. Before I go on, I want to ask you something directly. If you came back for part 2, if you watched part 1 and you couldn't sleep until you knew what happened next, then please hit the hype button right now. It takes 1 second, and it tells this platform that this story deserves to be heard by every woman who might be sitting somewhere right now, in a house that is being quietly taken from her, not knowing yet what is happening. And subscribe if you haven't. Because by the end of this episode, you will understand not just what happened to me, but exactly how to protect yourself and the people you love from the same thing. Are you ready? Then let me tell you about Priya. I found Priya Sharma through Clive Ashworth, my solicitor, the man managing the London probate proceedings on my behalf. Not directly, Clive was careful about professional boundaries. But he knew people. And one of those people was a 31-year-old woman who ran a small, intensely discreet firm in Clerkenwell specializing in financial fraud and digital crime. Priya had a first-class degree in computer science from UCL and 4 years in cybersecurity before she decided, as she told me at our first meeting, that she was more interested in catching people than in building fences. She was small, precise, and possessed of a particular quality of stillness. The stillness of someone always thinking faster than they are speaking. I liked her immediately. I laid everything on the table at our first meeting. My diary, all of it. 18 months of entries covering Arthur's illness. Every appointment, observation, date, and detail. Recorded in my small, precise handwriting because I have kept a diary since I was 19 and the habit has never left me. Arthur's medical records. Every document from Clive's office regarding the disputed last will and testament and the ongoing London probate proceedings. Tell me everything. I said. She looked at the stack, then she looked at me. Before I do, she said, I need to ask, how digitally connected was your husband in his final years? Video calls, email, tablet use? We had a tablet, I said, set up during the lockdowns for family video calls. By 2022, he used it less, but he could still answer a call if one came in. He recognized faces on a screen. That was one of the last things to go, recognizing faces. Priya wrote something in her notebook. And his email account? Active. I managed most correspondence by 2023, but the account was his, still open, still receiving. She set down her pen. Mrs. Sterling, she said, I want to be direct with you because I think you prefer it. I do, I said. The document submitted to London Probate has several features consistent with the type of fraud my firm has been tracking for 18 months. It involves artificial intelligence used in a way that the legal framework has not yet caught up with. She paused. I won't know for certain until I've examined the digital trail, but I believe your husband may never have signed anything at all. The room was very quiet. Then who did? I said. A version of him, she said. A digital version built from recordings. I did not know what a deepfake was before Priya explained it to me. The word had appeared in newspapers, belonging to some other world, some younger, louder world that had nothing to do with a retired garden designer in Kensington who still wrote in longhand and trusted people on their word. I was wrong. And that wrongness nearly cost me everything. A deepfake, Priya explained, is video or audio content generated by artificial intelligence that places one person's face, or voice, into footage they never recorded. The technology had existed in crude form for years. By 2023, it had become sophisticated enough to fool a video call. All it required was source material, existing footage of the person. The more footage, the more convincing the result. Where would someone get footage of Arthur? She asked, and I thought of James, our nephew. Cheerful, well-meaning James, who had filmed every family gathering for a decade and posted all of it to Facebook and Instagram with the breezy openness of a generation that had grown up treating privacy as negotiable. Arthur at James's wedding giving a speech. Arthur at his 80th birthday lunch, laughing at his own clock joke. Arthur at the Garden History Society Awards sitting beside me, turning his head to say something into my ear, talking, moving, being himself on camera, available to anyone who thought to look. Yes, I said, there are videos. Priya nodded slowly. Then someone with the right tools could have built a convincing version of Arthur Sterling, enough to conduct a video call with an online notarization service, enough to fool someone who had never met him in person and was not equipped to detect AI-generated video. The notary believed they were speaking to my husband, I said. Yes. And Arthur, the real Arthur, knew nothing about any of it. Nothing, she said. He was a source of footage, nothing more, I'm sorry. I sat with that for a moment, with the specific annihilating image of Arthur's face, his kind, absent, deteriorating face being worn by something that was not him, saying things he never said, signing away everything he had built. Find the trail, I said. Whatever it costs. Priya's investigation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks during which I continued to inhabit the suspended state that had become my life. Inside the contested house, managing my savings carefully, attending meetings at Clive's office as the London probate process ground forward. Waiting. Writing in my diary. Tending my garden with the specific, furious attention of a woman who needed her hands to be doing something purposeful. She called me on a Thursday evening and asked me to come in the following morning. Her voice was carefully neutral in the way I had already learned to recognize as her version of controlled alarm. She had printed everything. She knew I preferred paper. Arthur's email account, accessed with my authority as holder of the lasting power of attorney, had received, beginning in February 2023, a series of messages from Elena Vasquez. Careful, emotionally calibrated messages. She introduced herself as his daughter. She expressed a desire to connect. She sent photographs, a young woman at various ages, childhood through adulthood, resembling Arthur just enough to be plausible to someone whose grip on reality was already loosening. He had replied several times, but the replies Priya was certain were not his writing. The vocabulary, the sentence construction, wrong, written either by someone with access to his account or generated by AI to mimic an elderly man in cognitive decline. Both possibilities were equally sickening. How did they get into his account? I said. Priya slid a page across. His password was written in a small notebook in his workshop. His workshop, the workshop that various people had entered in those final years. His former apprentice. Care workers, family. I did not say anything, I filed it. The third page was financial. In September 2023, 2 months before the forged will was executed, a change of instruction had been submitted to Arthur's trust fund manager. Signed digitally by Arthur, authorizing a series of transfers. The total, Priya said, meeting my eyes, moved out of the trust fund and into an offshore account between September and November 2023 was £1.2 million. The number sat between us like a stone. £1.2 million. Arthur's careful, patient 50-year accumulation. The treasury bonds compounding quietly. The managed trust prudently tended. The financial safety net he had built so that I would never, his word, spoken more than once, never have to worry. Gone into a cryptocurrency wallet routed through an offshore account structured specifically to be difficult to trace. I thought about the estate tax implications, about the probate valuation, now distorted by the missing funds, about the additional layers of fraud stacked inside what had already been an act of theft. And then I stopped thinking about the money. Because the money, I realized, was not the center of it. The money was the mechanism. The center of it was something else, someone who had known us well enough to know what Arthur was worth, where he kept his password, how his mind had been failing, and how to use all of it. Priya, I said, I need to know who helped her. I need to stop the story here for just a moment. I am sharing every detail of this, every humiliating, devastating, carefully constructed detail, because I made a decision, after everything that was done to me, that silence is the enemy. That the most dangerous thing an older woman can do, in a world that already works to make us invisible, is to stay quiet about what was done to her in that invisibility. What happened to Arthur and to me could not have happened if we had known what to look for. If we had updated our last will and testament after his diagnosis, as Clive had gently suggested and I had kept postponing. If we had known that a video call could be faked, that a digital signature could be manufactured, that the financial records of a lifetime could be quietly rewritten around you while you were sitting in the next room, holding your husband's hand, trusting that the world was decent. If anyone in your life has become secretive about finances, if someone is managing an elderly relative's accounts without transparency, if something feels wrong but you can't quite name why, please speak to a solicitor. Please document everything. The way I document everything every day in my leather diary, and if this story is resonating with something in your own life, please tell me in the comments. I read every single one because what you share may protect someone else. Now, back to what Priya found next. Priya had been investigating Elena's background in parallel with the financial trail, her history, her movements, her professional contacts in the decade before any of this began. Elena Vasquez was real. Born 1990, Spanish civil records confirmed it. Her mother, Cristina Vasquez, had died in 2019, conveniently beyond the reach of any testimony. But Elena herself had been living and working in London since at least 2013. A decade in the city. Wealth management initially. Then freelance financial consulting. A woman who had spent 10 years moving through the world of private finance, trusts, portfolios, the careful, discreet management of other people's assets. Not a desperate woman reaching for a father she never knew. A professional with a very specific skill set applied to a very specific target. Can you find out who she knew? I asked Priya. In those years, her professional contacts, who she moved in circles with. 4 days later, Priya called. I need you to come in, she said. And bring family photographs, Christmas gatherings, family parties, anything from the past 10 to 15 years. I brought 3 albums. We went through them methodically, page by page. I named every face. She made notes. We moved through births and weddings and Christmases and the particular accumulated visual record of a family that had believed itself broadly to be a good one. We were near the end of the 3rd album, the later Christmases, the ones Arthur had already begun to drift sideways from when Priya stopped. She placed her finger on a photograph. It was not one I had taken, not one from our Christmas. It was a photograph from a different gathering, a different room, unfamiliar furniture, faces I half recognized from the periphery of our family life, tucked inside the back cover of the album, filed there probably years ago without my noticing. From a Christmas party I had not been invited to. The exclusion had been explained at the time with some excuse I could no longer precisely recall. 15 people, perhaps. Glasses raised, warm Christmas light. In the left corner of the frame, slightly apart from the group, 2 people in close conversation. A young woman, mid-20s, dark-haired, angular, with careful, watchful eyes. 10 years younger, but unmistakable. Elena Vasquez, and beside her, leaning toward her with the easy, intimate posture of someone who had known her for a long time, was a man I had known my entire life. My brother, Jeffrey. I looked at the photograph for a long time. Jeffrey, who had always found Arthur slightly too quiet, who had borrowed money from Arthur twice in the 90s and repaid it once, and whom Arthur had never pressed about the second loan because that was who Arthur was. Jeffrey, who had visited the house regularly in Arthur's final years, making himself useful, being present, positioning himself as the devoted brother-in-law. Jeffrey, who had been in the workshop, who had sat at Arthur's bench, who had admired, with what I had taken for genuine feeling, the collection of rare horological tools whose insurance valuation ran to 6 figures. Jeffrey, who had been standing in a Christmas photograph with Elena Vasquez a decade ago. A party I was not invited to. I set the photograph on the table. I looked at Priya, and I felt something move inside me that was beyond any single emotion I possess a name for. It was the specific, ice-cold, devastating clarity of a woman who now knows exactly what happened to her, and exactly who made it happen. My own brother. I sat with that for exactly as long as I needed to sit with it. Then I picked up my pen. I opened my diary to a fresh page, and I wrote 4 words at the top. Now I set the trap. Before I tell you what I did next, I need to tell you about a conversation Arthur and I had in the spring of 2021. He was still himself then, still mostly himself, in that early window of the illness when the fog came and went rather than settled. We had been speaking to Clive Ashworth about our wills, about updating the mirror wills we had made years earlier, about whether the power of attorney documentation was sufficiently robust. Arthur had been very quiet during that conversation, quieter than usual, even for him. That evening, he came to find me in the garden. I was staking the delphiniums. It had been a windy spring. He stood at the edge of the path and watched me for a moment. "Margaret," he said, "I want to tell you something." I looked up. "If anything happens to the documents," he said, "if anything goes wrong with the official things, the will, the accounts, if anything looks wrong." He paused, assembling the words carefully, the way he assembled everything, with patience, with precision. "Look at the portrait." "What portrait?" "Our wedding portrait in the hall." I frowned. "What about it?" He almost smiled. "I was a clockmaker for 50 years, he said. "I know how to hide things inside frames." And then he went back inside, because the evening was getting cold, and said nothing further about it. I had thought about it occasionally in the months afterward, had even mentioned it to Clive once, in passing, who had made a note and suggested we clarify it when Arthur was having a clearer day. But the clearer days became less frequent. And then they stopped. And I had let it slide, as I had let so many things slide in those years, because there was always something more pressing, always something that needed attending to before the thing that could wait until tomorrow. Arthur, who had spent a lifetime restoring and preserving the mechanisms of time, had built himself a failsafe. He had hidden something inside the frame of our wedding portrait, and it had been hanging in our hallway for 3 years, waiting for me to need it. I went home from Priya's office, walked directly to the hallway, and stood in front of the portrait. It had hung there for 30 years. A formal photograph from our wedding, 1979, Arthur in a dark suit, myself in the cream dress my mother had helped me choose, standing in the church doorway with the particular slightly dazed happiness of people who have just done something irrevocable and are glad of it. A large print in a deep mahogany frame. The kind of frame that has substance to it. Thick, solid. The sort that a craftsman would recognize as having interior space. I lifted it from the wall. I turned it over. The backing board was held in place with the small metal clips that any framer uses, ordinary, unremarkable. But in the bottom right corner, where the backing met the frame, there was a slightly raised section. Not obvious. Not, in 30 years of living alongside this portrait, ever visible enough to draw my attention. But I was looking now. I fetched a small flathead screwdriver from Arthur's workshop. I worked the raised section loose with the careful, patient attention that Arthur himself had taught me. Never force a mechanism. Always find the point of least resistance. The false section of the backing lifted away. Inside, in a shallow recess that Arthur had created, precisely, neatly, with the same craftsman's care he brought to everything, was a document. Folded twice. Wrapped in a small piece of acid-free tissue paper, the kind he used to protect delicate horological components. I unfolded it. It was a will. Handwritten, in Arthur's unmistakable hand, the particular loop of his S, the habitual full stop after his name that had been absent from the forged version. Dated March 2021, 2 months after his diagnosis, in that early window when he was still himself enough to be deliberate. Witnessed by 2 signatures I recognized immediately. Our neighbors from number 14, a couple who had lived on Kensington Grove since the early 90s, and who had apparently been quietly asked by Arthur to witness a document one afternoon without being told precisely what it was. The will was simple, clear, everything to me, the house, the trust, the collection, everything. And beneath his signature, in the small precise postscript that was entirely, characteristically Arthur, he had written 4 words, "I knew, I'm sorry." I sat down on the hallway floor, just sat down, right there on the tiles in my coat with my keys still in my hand, and I held that document against my chest. He had known. In those early months of the illness, when his mind was still clear enough to see what the fog might eventually allow, he had seen something, or suspected something, or simply known, with the instinct of a man who had spent 50 years learning to read the mechanisms of things. That something was not right in the people around him, and he had built me a fail-safe. He had trusted me to find it. I sat there for a long time, then I got up. I smoothed my coat. I called Clive Ashworth. "Clive," I said, "I need you to come to the house. I have found Arthur's original will, and I think it's time we arranged a meeting." What I am about to tell you, I want to be clear, was done in full consultation with Clive Ashworth and with Priya. Everything that happened in the next 10 days was documented, witnessed, and conducted with the kind of legal precision that Arthur would have approved of. I did not go to the police. Not yet. Not because I was afraid, I was not afraid, not anymore, but because I had learned from Clive's patient guidance that the evidence I had assembled was strong enough to be devastating in the right setting, and that the right setting was not a police interview room. It was a meeting. I called Jeffrey. This required a composure that I will not pretend was easy. I am a stoic woman. I was raised to be, and I have had additional reason to practice. But calling my brother, the brother I had grown up with, the brother who had sat at our kitchen table and eaten Arthur's cooking and accepted Arthur's unrepaid loan with the smooth ease of a man who had always known he would get away with things, and speaking to him with the careful warmth of someone who suspects nothing, was one of the harder performances of my life. I told him I was struggling, that the probate proceedings were becoming overwhelming, that I needed family support. Jeffrey, who had always enjoyed being needed, who had always found me slightly too self-sufficient and Arthur slightly too self-contained, heard the word struggling and arrived at the Kensington Grove house 4 days later with the unmistakable energy of a man who believes he is about to control something. He brought Elena. I had not asked him to. He arrived with her, introducing her at the door with a performance of surprised benevolence. Margaret, I know this is difficult, but Elena has been asking to speak with you, and I thought perhaps as family we could resolve some of this. That was so fluent I might have believed it once. Before the photograph, before the workshop, before I understood what I was looking at. I invited them both inside. Clive Ashworth was already in the sitting room, seated in the armchair to the left of the fireplace, with a manila folder on his knee and the expression of a man who has been a solicitor for 40 years and has seen everything. Priya was there too, seated quiet with her laptop open and a small recording device on the side table, all of it disclosed, all of it legal. Jeffrey's performance faltered slightly when he saw Clive. Elena's did not. She was better at this than my brother. She had always been better at this than my brother. We sat down. I let Clive speak first. He laid out, methodically and without emotional coloration, the evidence that Priya's investigation had assembled. The digital trail of the email correspondence, the deepfake video call and the fraudulent notarization, the offshore account, the cryptocurrency wallet, and the £1.2 million transferred out of Arthur's trust fund. The false digital signature on the transfer instructions. Jeffrey said nothing during this. He had gone very still in the way that people go still when they are calculating, not when they are shocked. Elena's expression remained exactly what it always was, composed, watchful, neutral. The expression of someone who has rehearsed every contingency. When Clive finished, there was a silence. And then Jeffrey said, with the particular confidence of a man who has always believed that the world adjusts for him, "This is all very interesting, Clive, but it's hardly conclusive. Digital documents can be challenged. Deepfakes can be fabricated after the fact as easily as before it. You have a theory. You don't have it, Jeffrey," I said. He stopped. I had not spoken until that moment. I had sat in the chair across from him with my hands folded in my lap and my back straight and my face entirely calm, the way our mother had taught me to sit when I was 7 years old and first learning that composure was a form of power. I reached into the document folder on my own knee. I took out Arthur's will, unfolded it, placed it on the coffee table between us face up so that Arthur's handwriting was visible. So that his signature, the S with its particular loop, the full stop after his name that was unmistakably, undeniably his was visible. And so that the date was visible. March 2021. Jeffrey looked at it. For the first time since he had walked into my sitting room, his composure shifted. It was small, a slight movement around the mouth, a change in how he was holding his shoulders, but I had known him for 68 years and I saw it. Elena saw the will and said nothing. But her hand, which had been resting loosely on the arm of her chair, went very still. "Arthur hid this," I said, "inside the frame of our wedding portrait, which has been hanging in the hallway of this house since 1994. He had it witnessed by 2 independent parties in March 2021, 2 months after his diagnosis. It supersedes any document executed after that date, including the digital will submitted to London probate, which was, as you have just heard, produced by a deepfake video and a fraudulent notarization service." I let that sit in the room for a moment. "The Metropolitan Police fraud team," I continued, "have been briefed. They have been building a file for several months. The notarization firm used to execute the false will has been identified as having facilitated multiple instances of elder financial fraud. The offshore account into which Arthur's trust fund was transferred has been traced. The cryptocurrency wallet is under investigation. I paused. And I have a photograph, I said, of you and Elena Vasquez at a Christmas party in 2014, 10 years before any of this began. Jeffrey opened his mouth. Don't, I said, very quietly. The way you speak to someone who has lost the right to your anger because your anger is too valuable to spend on them. He closed his mouth. I will not give you every detail of what followed, partly because some of it is still subject to ongoing legal proceedings, and Clive has advised me to be careful. Partly because, I will be honest with you, some of it is not mine to narrate in a way that is fair to the process. Justice, real justice, requires patience. It requires the machinery of the law to do what it is designed to do. And it requires the people who have done wrong to face consequences in the appropriate forum, not in a YouTube video. What I will tell you is this: Jeffrey and Elena left my house that day without the composure with which they had arrived. That is all I will say about how they left. The handwritten will, Arthur's real will, his hidden failsafe, was submitted to the London probate process. Given the evidence of fraud already assembled by Priya's investigation and the ongoing Metropolitan Police file, the legal machinery began to move in a different direction. The fraudulent will submitted by Elena was formally challenged and, in due course, set aside. The house, my house, our house, the house where the silver birch grows in the front garden and the wisteria hangs above the summer house door, remain mine. The trust fund has not been fully recovered. I will not pretend otherwise. Some of the money, routed through the cryptocurrency wallet, is still somewhere in the financial ether that investigators are working to map. The financial consequences of what was done to us will take years to fully resolve. I am realistic about that. But the house is mine, Arthur's will stands. And the person who had been standing between me and my own life, the person who had spent a decade carefully, patiently preparing to take everything, has been named, has been known, has had the thing that every person who works in secrecy fears most applied to them. The light. There is one more thing I need to tell you. The pearls came back to me. I will not tell you how, that is part of what is still subject to the proceedings, but they came back. The teardrop South Sea pearls that Arthur had given me on our 40th anniversary. The ones he had said were for always. The ones that had been around Elena's throat in my summer house on the day that everything crystallized into clarity. They were returned to me in the same burgundy leather box with the gold clasp, exactly as they had been. I held them for a long time. I thought about Arthur finding them, tracking them through an auction house, recognizing them as the kind of heirloom that deserved to belong to someone who would understand what they were. I thought about what he would say if I asked him what to do with them now. I thought I knew. I sold them. Not because I needed the money, though the money was not unwelcome given the state of the trust. I sold them because they had been somewhere they should not have been, and even though they were back in my hands, they carried something with them now, something that sat differently on my skin. I used the proceeds to establish a small foundation. It is called the Catherine Sterling Foundation, named for the daughter Arthur and I buried in Richmond in 1983. The daughter whose 4 days of life contained, in their entirety, everything I have ever understood about the kind of love that exists without conditions and without limit. The foundation provides legal support and advocacy for elderly victims of financial fraud. It helps people who are where I was, locked out of their own lives, unable to afford the solicitors and the investigators and the forensic document examiners and the long, expensive machinery of getting justice, to access the help they need. It is small so far. It will grow. Arthur would have approved, not with great fanfare. He was not a fanfare man. He would have nodded in the way he had of nodding when something was right and gone back to his clocks. I can almost hear it, that particular nod. I am Margaret Sterling. I am 72 years old. I was born in Richmond, London in 1954, the daughter of a landscape architect who taught me that the most dangerous thing in any garden is the weed you don't notice until it has taken the roots. I was married for 45 years to the most extraordinary man I have ever known, who spent his life making stopped things move again, and who, in the last clear months of his own mind, hid a document inside a picture frame because he trusted that I would find it when I needed to. I was, for a time, locked out of my own home, my own life, my own story. I am not locked out now. I want to leave you with something practical. Because I am, at heart, a practical woman, and I think the most loving thing I can do for you, for anyone watching this who might be in danger, is to give you something you can use. Update your will, not when things change. Now, an outdated last will and testament is an open door. Review your power of attorney, who holds it, how it is supervised, whether the person who holds it is the right person. Talk to a solicitor, not a form on a website, not an online legal platform, about how your estate is structured. The London probate process is not something you want to navigate in crisis. Understand it before you need it. Be careful about what is recorded. Videos of elderly relatives on social media are not just memories. In the wrong hands, they are source material. Write things down. Keep a record. A diary, a notebook, even a folder of printed emails. Documentation is not paranoia. It is, as I discovered, the difference between having evidence and having only a feeling. And if something feels wrong, if something in a will, an account, a relationship, a sudden appearance feels wrong, please trust that feeling. Please speak to someone. Please do not wait, as I waited, for the weight of it to become undeniable. You deserve to fight back. Whatever age you are, whatever they have taken, whatever they told you about being too old or too trusting or too irrelevant for the law to bother with, you are not too old, you are not too trusting. You are not invisible, not to the people who love you, not to each other, and not, I hope, not ever to yourself. My name is Margaret Sterling. I designed gardens for 40 years. I knew always that the most important work happens underground, in the root systems, in the dark, in the places no one sees. That what appears above the surface is only ever the visible consequence of what was carefully, patiently tended below it. Arthur built timepieces for 50 years. He knew that the most important work happens inside the mechanism, in the small, precise, invisible movements that keep everything in motion, that keep time honest, that make the hands on the face of the clock tell the truth. We built a life together on those principles, on patience, on precision, on the belief that things of value are worth the work of preserving them. They tried to take that life. They tried to erase it, to override it with a digital ghost, with a forged signature, with the particular modern audacity of people who believe that if something can be faked well enough, it becomes true. It does not become true. Arthur's handwriting is still his handwriting. His will is still his will. And I am still and always the woman he came to look at a sundial for. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it has meant something to you, if it has made you feel less alone, or more informed, or simply more certain that justice is possible and worth pursuing, please share it. Send it to someone you love who needs to hear it. Leave a comment. Tell me your story, because I read everyone and everyone matters. Hit the hype button one last time for Arthur, for Catherine, for every woman who has ever been told that her story doesn't warrant the telling. It does. Yours does too.